All right, well, it's 101. We're about to get started here. Welcome to this month's edition of Great Leadership Teams webinar series, episode number 26. My name is Jack McGinnis. I'm the managing partner at Relationship Impact, a consulting firm focused on helping leadership teams get in shape both structurally and relationally. And so today's topic is an important one during this crazy time we're going through right now. And wanted to start with a caveat that suggests, I'm not an expert at transitioning to a new normal, nor is anyone else, I guess. But that's not the focus of what I do. But I've been learning a lot from the clients I'm working with and the CEO network that I'm engaged with, and thought I would just put together some lessons learned from the work and the conversations I've been having with my clients and that network. And so that's what this is all about. And just in terms of focus, the focus is not so much on planning transition to the new normal. It's how to help your leadership team prepare and focus themselves for this transition. And depending on where you are in the country and where, I guess there's people from us abroad here as well, then a lot depends on that as well. But so today's topic is preparing your leadership team for the transition to a new normal. Just a couple notes on logistics. As I say every time on our webinars, first, our slides are thick with content. So I apologize for those of you who are PowerPoint aficionados and don't like as many words on the screen. That's just kind of how I do it, so I can distribute the slides afterwards. Secondly, if you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please don't hesitate to use the chat feature, and I'll do my best to answer the questions you have during the course of the discussion. So with all that behind us, we have a good crew of people on the horn today, so look forward to imparting as much good knowledge as I've gathered in the last couple months on how to transition to a new normal. So let's start by, I'm a consultant at heart, so or I am a consultant and been a consultant for most of my career, and I always have to put together some sort of model, right? And so in preparing your leadership team, there are three things that we think are really important. The first is mindset. We've kind of been in this mindset of remote working and moving away from the office, and so shifting the mindset is going to be an important thing for your leadership team to grapple with, and for them to help their teams grapple with. The second thing is modeling. When I mean modeling, I mean behavioral modeling. Modeling the behaviors you expect of the rest of the organization. And a leadership team plays a strong role in any significant crisis like this, and particularly as it's as you think about making some moves to transition, whenever that might be. And from our perspective, there's not too soon to start thinking about it and planning. The third thing is method, and this gets into more of the blocking and tackling around what some of our thoughts are and what we've been learning about from some of our clients around what they're thinking about, what they're doing practically to think through how to transition to a new normal. And as I'll talk about a little bit further, this is an overused cliche or phrase, but no question that it's really meaningful at this point in most organizations' lives. The only constant right now is uncertainty. I was just talking to one of my clients before about an article I read last week by a somewhat pretentious a professor at Northeastern University who when you read it, you were like, wow, he really thinks he knows what's going to actually happen. And, um, we don't know what's going to happen, but we can plan for it, and we can plan for, embrace the uncertainty as best we can. And that's what this discussion is all about. So let's get into it a little. Let's talk about mindset. And so or before we get into that, talk a little bit about what I mean by uncertainty as a constant. There are a lot of things that are uncertain right now. Changes in the social contract in terms of how we interact publicly, changes in the roles and rules of institutions related to that. The roles of our police force, the roles of nonprofits, the roles of our government agencies, the roles of big corporations that are playing more of an altruistic role in society right now. And then obviously, practically unpredictability in terms of financing. I won't tell you. I'm looking at the list here. You're all certain of, the credit market is tough. Raising capital is tough. The uncertainty around the SBA rules are still a challenge. And so, and the next thing I think is something that business owners, heads of associations, heads of nonprofits, heads of government contractors, government agencies, the permanence of our customer behavior changes is something that we can't take for granted, and we have to sort of get our heads wrapped around and plan for, and potentially leverage and take, and seize the opportunity in. And then the expectations for physical, emotional, financial, and digital safety. Expectations for safety is something that we're grappling with. So there's no certainty in these things as well, except for the fact that these are just 5 of many important things that organizations need to think through as they're planning for any transition. So what do I mean by mindset? So full disclosure, I stole this slide. It looked a little bit more creative than this one, but I stole this slide from, should I say adapted it? It's not exactly the same, but I adapted this content from this slide from Deloitte. And when I send you the slides, I'll have a link to the actual article on the bottom of the slide. That because it was really good in terms of thinking through more of a tactical planning approach. But from my perspective and the work that I'm doing with some of my clients' perspective, it's really getting their heads wrapped around the change in mindset, or the shift in mindset that is likely going to be important for their leadership teams to grapple with, to help the rest of their organizations grapple with, right? Because, we responded to this crisis. It was an unpredictable situation. And to recover, we're going to have to, it's still a bit unpredictable, but we're going to have to plan for some interim sort of normalcy. Our focus in terms of our response was very inward looking. How do we deal with remote workforce? How do we deal with, keep maintaining a rhythm? How do we deal with our interaction with our customers? And now it's, we have to be thinking about a market-facing environment where, we're really thinking about how do we recover lost revenue? How do we think about taking advantage of new opportunities? And from, a management perspective, obviously we're in this whole crisis management mode, and we're going to have to shift back to a more programmatic approach. I think, that's at least from our perspective. And again, from Deloitte's perspective as well, but I think it makes a lot of sense. And then from, planning in terms of contingencies to thinking through and having some foresight, I've been doing a lot of talking on LinkedIn and some short videos, and doing a lot of talking to CEO groups about the need for foresight, particularly now. It's never been more important. And foresight doesn't mean predicting the future. It simply means, being able to embrace all of the change and the information in our environment, and sort of making sense of it and identifying what the key variables are that are most important for our industry and our company or organization. So, for example, I'm working with a large trade association that does events and does education, and a big variable that they're thinking about is travel, corporate travel and their ability to travel. And so I think that variable is a big one as they're thinking about planning. And then attitude, sort of moving from a reactive mode to a more, how do we think, again, using our foresight, and how do we take advantage of some of the opportunities that we hadn't considered even before that are presented to us right now. Again, at that same trade association, CEO was hired about about 2 years ago, I guess now. And, he came in and he was really big push to move to a lot of education virtually, but was getting a lot of pushback from multiple stakeholders internally with his board, and also with his membership base. And, the silver lining for their organization now is that they're, sort of reinventing themselves into a more virtual education organization. They'll have a combination of both. They're also looking at, in terms of reinvention, they have some great office space that they use for training. And they're thinking about how do we, given that other associations may be downsizing their office space, how do we use that as another potential revenue source? So that it's those types of things, from the strategic to the sort of more tactical. So this is a shift in mindset, which I think is really important. And I think when you read this article in full, you'll get a even better sense of the types of mindset shifts that may be important. So what's the leadership team's role in any big transition like this? Probably shouldn't be much different than their role normally, but I'd like to, focus on it as if it were, that were the case. These things, I think, are characteristics of a leadership team's role that should be, from our perspective, be a constant. But if they're not, there's a few things that are really important, particularly as it relates to helping an organization transition or pivot during challenging times. So foresight, I talked about that a little earlier. It's not predicting the future. It's not being clairvoyant. It's really about, being open and setting aside your own biases, political, economic even, and thinking and being open to listen to multiple perspectives, not just one. I've committed myself to reading the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times because I don't want to be biased by either one of them. I still am. I still have my biases. I won't tell you which ones they are. Many of you on the call will know. But I think it's, and it's never been more important right now to have foresight, the ability to look at the environment and anticipate as best we can what some of the challenges and impacts to our industry and our organization might be. Sounds like a simple thing to do, but I'm seeing a lot of organizations look at their navels still and still just be dealing with the recovery mode. Having a greater good focus. We preach this a lot in the work that we do, and we try not to preach too much, but great leadership team members, actually writing an article on this right now, but great leadership team members have a greater good focus. And what I mean by that is they're, sure, they're good functional representatives for the organization, the CFO, the head of membership, whatever it might be. but they really take a greater good view of the organization and look, and yeah, they have a passion about the right path than their own, and they're not just focused on their own functional areas. Again, another simple thing to say, but oftentimes hard to do. And there's obviously a lot behind that. Sometimes it's, if you don't have that functional focus, you get taken advantage of. And that's, there's a whole bunch of crap wrong with your team if that's the case. Embracing uncertainty. Again, not what it's old ways, thinking beyond the next few months, managing multiple scenarios. Again, these all kind of go together. I think the next one's really important. Maintaining and modeling your firm's values and holding yourself and your teammates accountable and the rest of the organization accountable for those values. I had an interesting conversation with a bank CEO that I'm working with right now. And he mentioned to me that he was very frustrated with his CEO or his CFO because they're about to do a capital raise, and was very frustrated with the CFO who chose or presented his opinion that they should go with, some investment banking organization that really hadn't been loyal, had provided them good service in the past, and so that wasn't consistent with of his values of loyalty and relationship building. And so he had to step in and override that decision, which is not something you want to do all the time. But what you really do want to do is make sure your firm, your organization maintains consistency with its values, should be during the recovery, but also during, transition. And then I think a skill that is not often talked about is really important for a leadership team to model is a sense of curiosity. When you hear stuff that you're like, wow, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, or wow, that seems wrong, not dismissing it out of hand, not accepting it out of hand either, but just thinking, what's that all about? I wonder where that's coming from. Let's be open to thinking about things and not letting our own bias get in the way. So you hear some themes in the thoughts I'm putting across here. But leadership team's role in terms of modeling is really important, and these characteristics can help the team, help the team work with their teams to evolve the mindset that is necessary for transitioning. So now let's get into the method, right? To get into a little bit of the method behind what does a potential transition planning look like, right? And I'm not here to prescribe any one method, but I am here to give some thoughts about the types of things that probably should be considered and how they should be considered in any transition. So the first thing is workforce transition, right? That's the basic blocking and tackling of, how do I set up a safe space? How do I look at the local rules in the environment? How do we schedule people to come back to work if we are? How do we deal with any additional outbreaks? All those kind of things are really important to consider. The thing I don't see a lot of folks talking about this is this next bucket of recovery and growth. And I'm not stupid. I know there's probably the CEOs that got this on their mind for sure. But it's how do we recover lost revenue, and how do we get back on a growth track or trajectory? And so it's really thinking through, and engaging your board, and in many organizations, nonprofits and associations I'm in contact with, one of the things I'm hearing from them is that they're having to pull their boards rather than get direction from their boards in terms of how they're going to recover and grow again, because their board members are mired in their own crap right now as well. And so they feel like they're holding the hands of their boards a little bit more than they used to. But engaging your stakeholders and really understanding what your customers' environments are, and recognizing that customer behavior has changed a little bit, and the behavior of their customers has changed a little bit. And so how do we look at that in a way that we can, recapture some of the lost revenue and maybe take advantage of some new potential opportunities? Thinking through some potential scenarios, working with, I'm going to, in my next CEO call, which is 2 weeks from now, I'm having a special guest on that has done some really good work on scenario planning for their organization. And that will, you'll see, if you join that call, you'll see firsthand some of the different variables. He kept it simple, or their team kept it simple. I mean, he led the thing, but their team was really, scenario planning was driven by their team. Yeah, just he kept it simple and looked at what are the key variables that were going to help his organization think through what a bunch of scenarios might look like so they could get back on the growth trajectory. And that included things like travel. It included the behavior of their customers, and it included their supply some variables in their supply chain. And so they played with those 3 or 4 variables and thought through, what's the most likely scenario, what's a potential scenario, and what's the least likely scenario. And that's how they did it. I'm sure that there are multiple ways of doing scenario planning, but just thinking through what are some of the variables out there that we have to be thinking through and presenting those back to the board so that you can get some input from them as well on, what that might look like. And I guess subsumed within the scenario planning is this whole concept of business model shifts. Last piece, the last bucket is this whole concept of operational continuity. And as I'm cheating over and looking over to the right-hand side here, these things really must be, thinking about these 3 buckets can't be done in isolation. You may assign a team for each one of these, depending on the size of your organization, or your senior team may address all 3 of these. But they can't be done in isolation. They are all fairly closely connected with each other. And this whole concept of operational continuity supports the first 2, right? It's one organization I'm working with, they're saying, I'm talking to the COO, and he said, he keeps beating us up because our technology wasn't prepared. And there is some truth to that. But even if we had the right technology, what has been exposed is the fact that some of our processes were pretty poorly designed. And so before we do any crazy enhancements to technology, we have to actually tweak the processes as well. And then obviously there's some technology improvements, and it's not just for, how do we continue to deal with remote work and on-site work? It's how do we potentially take advantage of new opportunities? So for example, the trade association I talked about before, they're going, their move to more virtual education has required them to, adopt some new, potentially more robust technology to support their education platform. And then this whole concept of recognizing that, operational continuity is perhaps the wrong word. It's just business continuity, so that you can adapt to the uncertainty of things. And I think that's a really big one. It's the operations folks tend to want to view things, not all of them, but tend to want to view things in a black and white. We'll fix this now, and then we'll be all set. But I think that there's 2 things that has to happen as it relates to operational continuity. It's we'll fix this now, but we're also planning for 6 months to 12 months from now because of some of the new opportunities we have in front of us. And so you got to do the end, not but thing, but the end thing. And then obviously dealing with workforce economics. And what I simply mean by that is the workforce that you have right now may be the workforce that works for you in the next 12 months, but it may not be. You may have folks that are really good at in-person training, for example, that maybe not as good. Universities are dealing with this in spades. That you have some educators that are not necessarily good at online education, or that at least need some training in that. So how does that impact the workforce in terms of who stays, who goes, who needs development and training, and that type of thing? And then there's obviously the reality of lost revenue sometimes means lost, reductions in force as well, or at least redeployment in force. So again, workforce transition, recovery and growth, and operational continuity are things that, and again, the point here, it's a dimmer, not a light switch. You can't just switch these things on. You have to think them through. There's an evolution to this, and there has to be some kind of continuity or they have to be done in connection with each other. So again, larger organizations that we're working with, they have teams. They might not be these exact same teams, but they have teams like this that are that are dedicated to addressing these topics, and then coming back together and coalescing around what are we learning from each other. So that's the point with those things. I recognize that I went through each one of these slides when I actually had another slide for each one of these. So I'll try not to be redundant here, but so workforce transition encompasses health monitoring, social distancing, site safety, capacity planning, all in the interest of providing a healthy, welcoming, productive, secure work environment. And so a few things that I've already talked about, having a dedicated focus, making sure that you're scanning, taking a sense of the government, the municipality that you're working in, the healthcare environment, the public transportation. I mean, these are all basic blocking and tackling things. If you're a good operations person, you're probably going to think them through, right? What's the right work? What can be done on site? What can be done, continue to be done remotely? I know my wife is a partner at a big law firm, and they're not planning on coming back for work for quite some time because they're doing quite well working remotely. So they don't want to clog up the public transportation system. They don't want to, they want to be good corporate citizens. So it's thinking about what's, but other organizations can't do that, right? Employees, taking a pulse from them is who's comfortable, who is essential to return to work, and help begin to evolve the mindset, as we talked about earlier. What I mean by comfortable, there are those that will be, very reluctant to want to return to work. If they're essential, you may have to, adapt, convince, I'm not sure exactly how that will work, but these considerations nonetheless. And obviously the work environment. And having a plan, right? Having a plan that's comprehensive, phased, and over-communicated. And perhaps the word I should have put in here that's more important than any of it is that is adaptable, because it likely will change as soon as you put it out there. So that's workforce transition. Back to recovery and growth. What's the new vision? Where, I'm working with a couple of CEOs that are just doing it. I'm learning so much from them. They're doing such a good job, not putting their head in the sand and just thinking about, okay, this stinks. This was an awful situation, but how do we leverage what we're good at? How do we build some new capabilities, and how do we lean into this thing so we can come out on the other side, maintaining or stronger, right? And so that's, thinking through what that looks like is important. Again, recognizing you're not going to be perfectly right? Assessing and learning. These same CEOs, frankly, are thinking through who is really, particularly as it relates to the executive team, who's going to make it and who's not, right? And because some people that really have a tough time dealing with complexity and uncertainty. Sometimes some folks have a tough time taking that greater good focus and to recover and grow, you need folks that have those skills. And then learning from what do we do well? You know, a lot of firms that I'm talking about, two things. I'll talk. One is strategic, and one is sort of mundane. The strategic is, you know, we think we can do this remote stuff a lot more than we were before. Does that mean we're going to get rid of all our office space? Probably not, but we probably will do some things differently to, you know, even beyond the crisis to work differently. To the mundane, and then, you know, and I don't really think this is mundane, but it's a sort of a tactical issue. Is that, you know, almost to an organization, the clients I'm working with, and again, I'm only working with 5 right now, but I hear this from other CEOs as well. They started this rhythm of daily leadership team meetings, where they may have used to have them bi-monthly or monthly even, and the teams are really liking them. They're short, they're half-hour check-ins where they're talking about what's most important, or even just saying, checking in and seeing how people are doing. One of them last a few weeks back, I heard CEO heard something in this woman's voice, talked to her offline, and realized that one of her kids is really struggling through this, had some special needs, and sent her flowers and tell her to take a couple of days off, and, you know, and just having that compassion. But anyway, that the assessing and learning what's going well is obviously the rhythm. You know, maybe you don't have daily meetings, but maybe there is a need for more check-in. Who knows? It's an idea. Scenarios, we talked about that. Innovating and taking advantage of potential new opportunities. Prioritizing, right? You have a few scenarios, you got to pick something, right? And go with it and adapt and learn from, you know, if one of the variables is not exactly what you thought it was going to be, then adjust your plan accordingly. So recovery and growth. The next is evolving the infrastructure, you know, and this consulting language, but it's process, people, technology, right? It's what are we learning from the lockdown? Adjust short-term processes, revamp long-term processes, link them with the technology. People identify the stars and the challenges, continue to evolve the mindset, and reinforce your values. Commit, and I say this a lot, reinforce your values, and a lot of people, you know, have their eyes glazed over. But if you have strong values of, you know, people first, and, you know, we take care of our customers and stuff, those aren't trivial things, and they shouldn't be, at least. And you need your leadership team, particularly in difficult times, to maintain those values. Technology, you know, recommit to not only shore up the blemishes, but to enable innovation beyond the short term. The worst thing that you can have is, and I'm seeing this a little bit in a couple of clients I'm working with, the worst thing you can have is a really visionary CEO that with a curmudgeonly COO who just wants to get things back to the way they were, or vice versa, right? And that will cause some lockdowns for you. So, you know, you got to get everyone on the same page in terms of what that vision looks like. And so that's really all I got for you today. I hope that was helpful. There's, you know, so it's basically, you got to get your leadership team in the right mindset from recovery, some of this full reaction thing back to back to an interim new normal, and so they can help the rest of the organization adapt that similar mindset and continue to reinforce it. And then there's some behaviors that the leadership team needs to model, including foresight and a greater good focus and an ability to deal with complexity. And then, you know, I just gave you some suggestions on a potential method or framework for transition. So that's all I got for you today. I was hoping there'd be some more questions. If anyone's got any questions, please ask them now. If not, I'm going to give you a plug here. I have a leadership team recharge consultation where I'll give you 60 minutes with your team for, you know, a consultation with your team to assess where you're at. And then next webinar is refining your leadership team's decision-making approach on June 24th. So until then, I look forward to hearing from you. All right, I got a question. Let's see. Chat. Thank you for this. Good talk. Okay, thank you. Well, I'll get, as always, I'll get these links to these slides and some other content out to you within the next 24 hours. And I look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thanks so much for participating.